Everyone was there to celebrate the engagement of the year. Daniel Whitfield, one of the most respected businessmen in Crescent Bay, was about to marry the perfect woman, Victoria Hale, kind, warm, pleasant, to absolutely everyone who crossed her path. To every guest in that house that night, she was the picture of exactly what a wife was supposed to be. But no one, not a single person in that crowd, knew what the housekeeper of that house was holding on to. Claire Bennett had spent 6 years working for that family, 6 years learning to stay quiet, 6 years being to almost everyone around her practically invisible. But that night, she was carrying something heavier than a tray of champagne glasses. She was carrying a secret, and she had already decided to reveal it in front of every single guest in that room. Crescent Bay was the kind of southern coastal town that seemed built from two entirely different worlds. Down near the water, there were fishing docks, peeling paint on old porches strung with ceiling fans, sweet tea served before anyone even asked for it, and diners that had been serving the same coffee for 30 years. Spanish moss hung heavy from the live oaks along Main Street, and everyone, without exception, said y'all and bless your heart the way other places said hello. Up on the bluff overlooking the bay, there was another town altogether. Iron gates, manicured lawns lined with magnolia trees, wrap-around porches nobody actually sat on, and a silence so complete it almost felt rehearsed. It was in that second town, in a sprawling white house with a view of the water, that Daniel Whitfield lived. 39 years old, founder and owner of Brightstone Developments, a real estate and construction firm he had built from nothing after his father lost almost everything in a failed venture more than 15 years earlier. Daniel didn't talk about that. He didn't talk about much of anything from his past, actually. What people knew about him was only what showed on the surface. A serious, demanding man who arrived at job sites by 7 in the morning and didn't leave the office until 9 at night, who rarely smiled, and who, according to the quiet rumors that circulated at every dinner party in town, hadn't trusted a woman since his previous fiancée walked out on him 6 years earlier, 2 weeks before their wedding, taking with her not just the engagement ring, but a sizable chunk of his savings. People talked about that. Quietly, of course, but they talked. Claire Bennett had been working in that house for 6 years. She had learned in that time exactly how Mr. Whitfield liked his coffee. Black, no sugar, but always with a single drop of vanilla, even though he'd never once asked for it that way. She knew the order he liked his dinner plates cleared. And more than anything else, she had learned something nobody ever taught her, something she'd figured out entirely on her own: how to be invisible. Not by choice, not at first. It was simply what was expected of her. She had her own reasons for staying in that job, reasons no one in that house fully understood, except for Loretta Jenkins, the older woman who had been cooking for the Whitfield family for almost 20 years, and who had, over time, become something close to a mother to Claire inside those walls. "How's your mum doing?" Loretta asked her one morning, dicing onions at the kitchen counter. "Same," Claire said, lowering her voice, even though no one else was nearby. "The doctor says she has to keep up with the treatment. If she stops now, everything she's gained just disappears. And the treatment's still costing the same." Claire didn't answer right away. She kept stacking the coffee cups, as if the silence might somehow make the question less real. "More," she finally said, "but they pay me well here. And Mr. Whitfield, whatever else you want to say about him, he's never once been late with a paycheck." That part was true. And it was deep down the real reason Claire stayed, enduring a kind of treatment that in any other situation, in any other life, she probably wouldn't have put up with. Being invisible to a man like Daniel Whitfield was uncomfortable, but losing the only job that paid for her mother's treatment was something she simply couldn't afford. So she learned to stay quiet, to pour the coffee, to lower her eyes when it was easier that way. And without anyone realizing it, not even Claire herself, not entirely, at least not at first, she also learned over the years to notice something she had no business noticing: the way Daniel Whitfield, underneath all that coldness, would sometimes stand at his office window staring out at the water with an expression that looked simply like exhaustion, like loneliness. Claire never said a word about that to anyone, not even Loretta. Some things, she figured, were better kept to herself. There was a whole story behind Claire too, one she never told inside that house, not to Daniel, not to anyone except, every now and then, Loretta. She'd grown up a couple hours inland, past the pine flatwoods, in a town so small it didn't even have its own stoplight, with a father who left when she was 8, and a mother who'd spent her entire life cleaning other people's houses just so Claire could finish high school. She'd dreamed as a teenager of becoming a nurse, and she'd even enrolled in a nursing program at the local community college on a partial scholarship. But 6 months in, her mother started getting sick, and Claire dropped out before finishing her first year. She went back home, found work, and eventually ended up at the Whitfield house. She didn't regret the decision, but some nights she still dreamed about the life she might have had if things had gone just a little differently. Everything changed, or started to change, one afternoon in October, when Daniel walked through the door with a woman who, by his own account that very night, had changed his entire life in just 3 weeks. "This is Victoria," he said, and for the first time in a long while Claire heard something different in his voice, something that sounded almost like hope. Victoria Hale was 33, with a smile that seemed custom-built for whoever happened to be looking at her, and a way of speaking, soft, warm, with the faintest trace of an accent that didn't quite belong to any one place, that made nearly anyone, within minutes, want to tell her their entire life story. "It's so nice to meet you," she said to Claire that first day, extending her hand. It was, as it turned out, the only time Victoria ever treated her like a person, and not like another piece of the furniture, because after that first afternoon, things changed fast. "Claire, this coffee's cold," Victoria said 2 weeks later, in front of Daniel and 2 dinner guests. The coffee wasn't cold. Claire knew that because she'd poured it less than 3 minutes earlier, but she said nothing. She lowered her eyes, picked up the cup, and went back to the kitchen to reheat coffee that didn't need reheating. "My apologies, Miss Hale," she said, returning. "You really need to be more careful," Victoria replied, with a smile that to any of the guests watching looked perfectly pleasant. To Claire there was something underneath that smile that felt sharp as a blade. Daniel said nothing. Not that night, and not the other times something similar happened in the weeks that followed. And that, Daniel's silence, his refusal to ever stand up for her, even when the unfairness of it was obvious, became over those months the most constant wound in Claire's daily life. But there was something else too, something that started almost without her noticing. One evening when she found Daniel alone on the back porch, a glass of wine untouched beside him, staring out at the water with that same tired expression. "Need anything, Mr. Whitfield?" she asked, the way she always did. Daniel turned, and for one instant, just one, brief enough that she'd later doubt it had even happened, he looked at her like he was actually seeing her, not the housekeeper, a person. "Do you ever think—" he started, and stopped himself. "Sir?" "Never mind," he said, turning back to the water. "Forget it." That night, Claire couldn't stop thinking about that unfinished question, and without meaning to, without wanting to, she felt something she'd known from the very beginning she shouldn't feel. She tucked that feeling away in the same place she kept everything else, somewhere deep and quiet, where no one could ever find it. The engagement was announced in December, at a party Daniel threw in the backyard of the house, with string lights woven through the live oaks, pitchers of sweet tea and lemonade lined up alongside the champagne, and a band hired specifically for the occasion. "I want everyone here to know," Daniel said that night, in front of nearly 100 guests, Victoria on his arm, "that this is the woman I'm going to spend the rest of my life with." There was applause. There were even tears among some of the guests, moved by the obvious happiness on the face of a man who for years had seemed closed off to any possibility of love. Half an hour earlier, while Claire had been arranging glasses on a side table, Victoria had walked over smiling, flanked by 2 of the most polished women at the party. "Look at this," she said to them, gesturing toward Claire with an almost affectionate wave, like she was pointing out something curious. "She's the one who's kept this house running for years. Isn't that little drawl just adorable, so country?" The women laughed, no real malice in it, simply following whatever tone Victoria had set. Claire felt the heat rise to her face, but kept the tray steady in her hands. "If you'll excuse me," she said, walking away before the conversation could continue. Daniel, only a few feet away, deep in conversation with a business associate, gave no sign he'd heard any of it. Marcus Reed, Daniel's business partner for over 10 years and the closest thing he had to a best friend, was one of the few who dared say what he was thinking that same night. 3 months, Daniel," he said, pulling him aside. "You've known her 3 months, and you're already putting a ring on her finger. I don't need you telling me how to run my life, Marcus. I'm not telling you how to run your life. I'm telling you to be careful. We don't know anything about her. Where she's from, what she did before, none of it." "For the first time in years," Daniel said finally, "I don't feel alone." Marcus didn't push it any further that night, but a few weeks later he hired, without telling anyone, not even Daniel, a private investigator who never managed to deliver a complete report because the little digging he could do turned up almost nothing. No previous last name, no clear record of where Victoria had lived before showing up in Crescent Bay. That on its own should have set off alarm bells, but no one yet was paying close enough attention. The first real crack in Victoria Hale's perfect surface appeared, without her knowing, one night in January, when Claire, carrying a tray of tea toward the guest room where Victoria liked to take her private calls, overheard something through the half-open door that froze her in place. "No, listen to me," Victoria was saying, her voice low but tense, an accent slipping through that sounded sharper than usual, as if the soft, warm voice she normally used had, just for a moment, peeled away a layer. "I told you this would take longer. I can't rush it, not here. This one isn't like the others." Silence. Claire, the tray trembling slightly in her hands, didn't dare move. "Yes, I know what happened in Madrid, but this is different. This family has lawyers, connections, all of it. If anything goes wrong—" Another pause. "Don't call this number again. When it's time, I'll let you know." The call ended. Claire stepped away from the door just in time, before Victoria emerged with that same smile she always wore, as if nothing had happened at all. That night, in her room, Claire couldn't sleep. What had happened in Madrid? Why was Victoria talking about the Whitfield family like a target, something to be handled carefully, instead of the family she was about to marry into out of love? She thought about telling someone, but what would she even say? That she overheard fragments of a conversation through a half-closed door? Who would believe her? Who would take her word, the housekeeper's word, over the word of the woman about to become the lady of the house? And above everything else, there was something else holding her back: fear. If she said something and no one believed her, the most likely outcome was that Victoria, clever as she was already proving to be, would find a way to make it look like Claire was the one lying, and that could cost her the job that paid for her mother's treatment. So that night, she decided to say nothing, but she couldn't stop thinking about it either. 2 nights later, unable to carry the weight of it alone any longer, she called her mother. "Is everything okay?" her mother asked. "You never call in the middle of the week." She told her, without going into every detail, that she'd overheard something that worried her about Mr. Whitfield's fiancé, and that she didn't know whether to say something or just keep quiet. "Remember when you dropped out of the nursing program?" her mother asked. "I never said anything back then. I kept quiet because I was scared to ask for help, scared someone would say no." "It's not the same thing, Mom. It's similar. Fear is always similar, honey. The question is never whether you're scared. The question is what you're going to do about it. What if I'm wrong? What if I lose my job over something I can't even prove? Then you'll lose it doing the right thing. And that, you can always rebuild. What you can't rebuild twice is the person you stop being when you decide to keep quiet out of fear." That sentence stayed with Claire for the days and weeks that followed, like a small compass. In the weeks after that, without fully admitting to herself what she was doing, Claire started paying attention to small details that had slipped past her before. She noticed how Victoria's way of speaking shifted slightly whenever she thought no one was listening. She noticed how skillfully she dodged any question about her family or her childhood. What she did notice, though, was an unusual curiosity Victoria had about the practical details of the house, where Daniel's grandmother's jewelry was kept, which banks handled the company's accounts, what the combination was to the safe in the study. Questions that at the time seemed like nothing more than a future wife learning her way around her new home. She also noticed that Victoria had left an email account open on the computer in the study, and that one afternoon, without really meaning to, Claire let her eyes linger on the screen a second too long. A name. Just a name. In the sender field of an email Victoria hadn't fully closed out. Isadora Mendez. The sound of footsteps in the hallway startled her. She killed the screen in one motion and grabbed the feather duster she'd left on the desk, right as Victoria walked into the study. "What are you doing in here?" she asked, her voice a touch higher than usual. "Cleaning, ma'am, same as every day." Victoria looked at her a second too long, glanced at the now dark computer screen, and without another word, sat down at the desk. Claire walked out with her heart pounding so hard she was sure it showed on her face. That night, with her phone in her hands and her heart racing with a mix of fear and resolve, she typed that name into the search bar. The first results didn't say much. An old, mostly abandoned social media profile with just a couple of photos. But one of those photos, a young woman on what looked like a Spanish beach, her hair a different shade than the one she wore now, but unmistakably the same face, sent a chill down Claire's spine. It was her. Further down in a short note from a local Spanish newspaper, nearly 5 years old, Claire found something more. A man named Andrés Castellanos, a businessman, and a sentence she read 3 times to make sure she'd understood it correctly. A woman identified only by the initials IM had married him in an intimate ceremony and barely 2 months later had disappeared along with a significant portion of his fortune without leaving a single trace. Claire closed her phone and stared at the ceiling of her room for a long time. She didn't have enough proof yet, but now she had something she hadn't had before, a suspicion with a name attached to it. And with that came a decision that would keep her up for many more nights to come. Should she say something? Or was it easier, simpler, to just stay quiet, finish out her work, take care of her mother, and let the Whitfield family's life run its course? A part of her, a part she hated even admitting existed, thought for one brief moment that maybe doing nothing was the easier path. That if Daniel Whitfield had decided not to see what was right in front of him, maybe in some way, he deserved whatever came from that blindness. That thought scared her more than anything else that night, because it wasn't who she wanted to be. The next morning she decided to try anyway, not with hard proof yet, just a careful, simple warning. She found him alone in his study. "Mr. Whitfield," she said from the doorway, "could I talk to you for a moment? Make it quick. I've got a meeting in half an hour." "It's about Ms. Hale." Something shifted in Daniel's face. A slight hardening, barely noticeable. "I overheard something, a phone call, and I found a name in a search that looks a lot like her, but under a different identity in Spain. Something happened years ago, some kind of fraud, and wait, are you telling me you've been digging into my fiancé's background?" "It wasn't like that, sir. You overheard a private conversation, and now you're standing here telling me my fiancé is, what, some kind of con artist based on what exactly? A name that looks like another name? Sir, please, just listen. No, you listen to me. You've worked in this house for 6 years, Claire, and you've always carried yourself with respect. I don't know what's gotten into you, but I'm going to ask you, as clearly as I possibly can, to know your place." The words landed like stones. "Don't insert yourself into my personal life again," he continued. "Don't eavesdrop on conversations. Don't go searching names online, and don't come to me with unproven stories about the woman I'm about to marry. Understood?" "Understood, sir," she said, her voice steadier than she actually felt. "It won't happen again." She walked out of the study with her back straight and her eyes dry, all the way to the kitchen, where finally, standing in front of the sink, she let the tears fall in silence. Loretta walked in a minute later and didn't need to ask what had happened. She just came over and held her without a word for a long time. "Don't try that again," she finally said. "Not with him. Not like that." "Then what am I supposed to do, Loretta? Just stand here while that woman does God knows what to this family?" "You do what you have to do, but carefully, without him knowing. Because if you're wrong, sweetheart, you're the one who loses this job, not him." That sentence stayed with Claire for a long time. That same night, alone in her room, she let herself consider something she hadn't allowed herself to even think about until then: quitting, leaving before they fired her. She went looking for Loretta in the kitchen nearly at midnight. "I think I'm going to quit," she said. "And your mom?" Loretta asked, not the least bit surprised. "Before or after her treatment gets cut off for non-payment? It isn't fair, Loretta, that I have to stay here putting up with this just because I don't have another option. No, it isn't fair, but I'll tell you something. Quitting now isn't bravery. It's exhaustion. You stay. You finish what you started. And when the moment comes, you tell the truth as loudly and clearly as you can. After that, you decide whether you stay or go. And if I lose anyway, then you'll lose having told the truth. And that, honey, is worth more than you think." Victoria, who had no doubt heard about the conversation between Claire and Daniel one way or another, started treating her with a new, calculated coldness, the way someone behaves when they know they hold all the power in a situation. One afternoon, while pouring tea out on the patio, Claire couldn't resist dropping a small hint, just a vague suggestion, without revealing how much she actually knew. "It must have been an interesting life you've had, Miss Hale," she said, keeping her voice as neutral as she could manage. "Traveling so much, seeing so many different places, so many different names, I'd imagine, for just one person." Victoria went completely still, her teacup halfway to her lips. "What exactly are you implying?" "Nothing, Mom, just an observation." Victoria's smile slid back into place, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. "Be very careful, Claire," she said low, taking a step closer. "You have no idea who you're messing with. People like you who think they can play detective, end up losing a lot more than a job. But Claire, that night, knew she couldn't simply stop there. That threat, delivered without raising her voice, without losing her composure for even a second, confirmed something the evidence hadn't fully proven yet, that she was right. So, more carefully this time, telling no one what she was doing, Claire kept digging. Weeks later, she found on an overseas forum dedicated to exposing romance scams a thread where a woman described being deceived by someone named Isadora in Spain almost 5 years earlier, in a pattern that matched, point for point, what she already suspected. A fast, intense relationship, a wedding that actually happened, and just weeks later, a sudden disappearance, right after the money in a joint account got wired somewhere else entirely. Further down the same thread, another commenter, this one from Argentina, told a nearly identical story under a different name, Camila Reyes, but with photos showing the same woman, just a few years younger. Claire saved the screenshots, feeling, for the first time since all of this began, like she finally had something solid in her hands. And yet, somewhere among the screenshots and the testimonies, she found a detail that stopped her cold. In one of the oldest comments, someone who claimed to have known Isadora since childhood wrote something that didn't sound like an accusation, but almost like grief, that they'd known her growing up in a poor neighborhood in Brazil, where Isadora had watched her own mother get deceived again and again by men who promised to take care of her and left her with even less than she'd started with, that she wasn't a woman without a soul. She was a woman who had decided long ago to survive the only way she knew how. Claire read that comment several times. It didn't change anything she needed to do, but for the first time, she felt like this wasn't as simple as a bad woman deceiving a good man. It was a wounded woman now wounding others without seeming to care. And it was a man who, in his own old pain, had become so wary of anything real that he'd ended up the perfect target for someone who knew exactly how to look real. That didn't make her doubt what she had to do, but it did make her feel for the first time something close to sympathy, even for the woman she was about to expose. That same night, she went down to the kitchen and found Loretta still awake. "I can't stop thinking about something," she told her. "What I'm about to do is going to destroy that woman's life, and part of me understands why she became this way." "Understanding why someone does something isn't the same as forgiving them," Loretta replied. "It doesn't mean you owe her your silence either. You're not doing this out of revenge. I know you, Claire. You're doing this because it's right, and because if you don't, someone else is going to get hurt. What if deep down I just want to see her fall? You'll know eventually, by how you feel afterward. People who act out of revenge almost never feel peace once it's over. If what you feel in the end is peace, you'll know you did the right thing." The document that finally convinced Claire she couldn't wait any longer landed in her lap almost by accident, one afternoon in March, barely 3 weeks before the wedding. Daniel had left early, and Victoria, distracted by a call out in the garden, left a folder of bank papers on the desk in the study. Claire, going in to clean like she did every day, had no intention of looking at anything. But a name in the top corner of one of the documents caught her eye, a brand new joint account, opened just a month earlier, in both Daniel Whitfield's and Victoria Hale's names, with a clause allowing for automatic fund transfers between accounts linked to Brightstone Developments, contingent on the marriage going through. Beside it, in a handwritten note that looked like a rough draft, Claire read something that made her blood run cold. A list of amounts, dates, and at the bottom, a sentence that had been written and then crossed out. "After the wedding, before the end of the month." Claire photographed every page before putting the folder back exactly where she found it. She didn't sleep at all that night. She had now everything she needed: the previous name, the stories from Spain and Argentina, and a document laying out the plan in black and white. But she also had an enormous problem. The last time she'd tried to tell Daniel anything, he'd humiliated her and ordered her never to interfere again. So she decided to wait for the one moment when she was sure no one could simply brush her off. The final engagement party, scheduled 3 weeks out, where Daniel and Victoria would both be present, along with Marcus, Eleanor Whitfield, Daniel's mother, and dozens of other guests. The 3 weeks that followed felt to Claire like a silent countdown. The first thing that changed the course of events was a conversation with Eleanor Whitfield, a sharp, elegant but quiet woman of 68 who visited her son every couple of weeks, almost always alone. "Claire," she said one afternoon, "can I ask you something? Do you trust Victoria?" The question caught her completely off guard, but something in the older woman's eyes, something genuinely worried for her son, made Claire decide to trust her, at least a little. "No, ma'am," she finally said. "I don't trust her." "Neither do I," Eleanor said. "But Daniel won't listen to me. He says I'm always suspicious of any woman who gets close to him, ever since what happened with the last one. Do you know something I don't? I have proof, but I can't show it to him without it looking like I'm making something up to hurt him. So, what are you going to do? Wait for the engagement party. Say it there in front of everyone where he can't just ignore me. That's a gamble. If you're wrong, my son will never forgive you, and if you're right, he might not either." Eleanor finally rested a hand on Claire's shoulder. "When that moment comes," she said, "I'll be there, and I'll believe you, before I listen to anything else." It was the first time through this entire ordeal that Claire felt like she wasn't completely alone. The second thing that happened, just a week before the party, was far less hopeful. Victoria, who seemed to have noticed something different in Claire's behavior, decided to act. "Daniel," Claire overheard her say from the kitchen, "I need to tell you something. Yesterday I found Claire going through documents in the study, bank documents. You already talked to her about this once, and it looks like nothing's changed. I don't want to be the one to make this call, but after this, I don't think we can keep trusting her." "I'll think about it," Daniel finally said. That night, Claire understood she was running out of time. She had 6 days left until the party, and for the first time since all of this began, she didn't know if she'd make it that far without getting fired first. The days that followed were, for Claire, an exercise in constant caution. But beneath that calm surface, something in her had changed. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was also a resolve that grew a little stronger every single day. Victoria, for her part, sensed something had shifted too, even if she couldn't quite place what. Daniel had grown quieter than usual, more distant. "Is something wrong?" she asked him one evening. "Nothing," Daniel said without looking up. "Just tired from work." "The wedding's so close now," she said softly. "I never thought I could feel this secure with someone." For a moment, Daniel felt the old pull to believe her, to let himself fall back into that warmth that felt so real. But this time, something in him didn't fully give in. "I want to be secure too," he said, "about everything." Victoria looked up, and for a split second, something like alarm crossed her face before the smile slid back into place. 3 days before the party, something happened that Claire didn't expect. Daniel called her into his study. She walked in with her heart pounding, bracing herself to hear she was being let go. Instead, she found a man who looked for the first time in a long while genuinely confused. "Victoria told me she caught you going through bank documents." "That's not true, sir." "I know. I checked the study cameras. At the time she claimed you were in the kitchen with Loretta. You weren't anywhere near the study." "Then why would she say that?" "I don't know," he said, and for the first time his voice had lost its usual edge. "I don't know, Claire, and that's what bothers me the most." He stood quiet for a moment, looking out at the water. "What you told me a few weeks back, do you still have that, the proof you mentioned?" "Yes, sir. I still have it." Daniel was quiet for what felt like a full minute. "I'm not going to ask you to show it to me right now," he said finally, "because honestly I don't know if I'm ready to see it. But I want you to know something." And here, for the first time in 6 years, he looked at her in a way he never had before. "The way I spoke to you that day wasn't right. You didn't need flawless proof to deserve being heard, and instead I treated you like you didn't deserve even that much." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet. I still don't know what I'm about to have to deal with." That same afternoon, Daniel called Marcus and asked him to meet. "You were right," he told him, without any preamble. "About Victoria. Claire has proof. Photographs, old names, a bank document suggesting she planned to walk away with a significant chunk of the company's money after the wedding. What are you going to do?" "I think this needs to happen somewhere I can't control it. Somewhere Claire can say what she needs to say in front of people who don't owe Victoria anything." "And Claire," Marcus asked, "how have you been treating her this whole time, while she was trying to tell you all this?" Daniel didn't answer right away. "Badly," he finally admitted. "I treated her badly." "Then you've got 2 things to fix, not just one." The final engagement party was held on a Saturday at the end of March, in the backyard of the house, with nearly twice as many guests as the December party had drawn. Claire, in her usual uniform, moved between the tables pouring drinks, holding a calm exterior that didn't match a thing she was feeling inside. Tucked in her apron pocket were printed photographs of the 2 newspaper stories, the forum testimonies, and the photo of the bank document. Eleanor, who arrived early, found Claire for a moment. "Are you ready?" "I don't know," Claire admitted, honestly, "but I'm doing it anyway. I'll be close by. When the moment comes, you won't be alone." The party went on for almost 2 hours without incident. The toasts, the laughter, the opening champagne toast between Daniel and Victoria. "To us," Daniel said, raising his glass for the room to see. "To the future." It was right after that toast, just as the music dipped low, that Claire, hands trembling but voice steady, stepped forward. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, her voice carrying louder than she expected. "I need to say something, and I need to say it now in front of everyone, because there's no more time to wait." Heads turned. "Claire, this isn't the time," Daniel said, lowering his voice. "We'll talk about this in private later." "There isn't going to be a later, sir, not if you sign those papers this week." "No," Eleanor said, stepping forward. "Let her talk. I want to hear what she has to say." Daniel looked at his mother, then at Claire, and something in his face made him finally step back. "Go ahead. The woman you're about to marry," Claire continued, "isn't named Victoria Hale." Nervous laughter rippled through the guests. "In Spain, she went by Isadora, and before that in Argentina, she used a different name entirely." Total silence. "Claire," Daniel said, "be careful what you're saying. I have the photographs, I have the names, and I have Mr. Whitfield, her signature, on a document she had you sign 3 weeks ago." Victoria finally broke the silence. "This is absurd. Daniel, this woman is confused, or maybe jealous, but this is ridiculous." "Show me what you have," Daniel said, his eyes still on Claire. She pulled the photographs from her pocket and laid them across the table. "Isadora Mendez disappeared 5 years ago in Spain, barely 2 months after marrying a man, taking a substantial portion of his fortune with her." The second photograph showed a screenshot from the forum, with testimonies from Argentina. "Camila Reyes, same pattern, same story, different name. Another man, another fortune, another disappearance." And finally, she showed the photo of the bank document. "After the wedding, before the end of the month," she read aloud the crossed-out line. "That's what your fiancé was planning to do with your company's money, Mr. Whitfield." The silence that followed was absolute. "This is insane," Victoria said, with a forced laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Blurry photographs, online forums where anyone can write whatever they want. Are you really going to throw away everything we have over this, Daniel?" "Show us your passport, then," Marcus said. "If your name's really Victoria Hale, that shouldn't be a problem. I don't owe anyone here proof of anything." "What reason would she have to be resentful?" Eleanor asked, stepping forward. "Why would Claire be resentful? You've treated her badly since the day you walked into this house, and she never said an unkind word. Until now. And answer me something. Where are you actually from? What city? What family? In 6 months, I never once heard you tell a clear story about your past. My family isn't something I enjoy discussing. Or maybe it's because the family you claim doesn't exist," Marcus pressed. "I had someone look into it months ago, Daniel. There was nothing. It's like Victoria Hale didn't exist before she showed up in this town." Victoria shifted tactics. She moved closer to Daniel, eyes glistening, her voice breaking at exactly the right moment, the one that had worked on him so many times before. "Daniel, look at me. Do you really believe everything we've shared was a lie? What I feel for you is real. That woman is obsessed with you, can't you see that? She made all of this up because she can't stand seeing you happy with someone else." For one instant, just one, something in Daniel's expression wavered. But then he looked down at the document on the table, his signature, forged with a precision that only came from real practice, and the doubt closed as fast as it had opened. "For someone with nothing to hide," he said, his voice cold, "you've given an awful lot of different answers to the same question." Victoria's face changed completely. The softness vanished in an instant, like a mask that no longer served any purpose. "You're going to regret this," she said, staring straight at Claire, her voice no longer bothering to fake warmth. "You, especially. You have no idea what you just started." "I've heard that one before, Ma'am," Claire replied, holding her gaze. "And I'm still standing here." "Someone call the police," Daniel said. "Right now." It was in that moment of confusion, while Marcus stepped away to find his phone, and several guests began murmuring among themselves, that Victoria, with a calm everyone would later recognize as pure calculation, said she needed a moment, that she was going to grab her coat, that all of this was too much to process at once. No one stopped her. When Daniel went upstairs a few minutes later to look for her, he found the master bedroom door open, the closet ransacked, and the safe in the study, whose combination she had apparently memorized weeks earlier, with the same patience she'd used to observe everything else in that house, completely empty. His grandmother's jewelry was gone, kept in that safe for more than 40 years. So was a substantial amount of the cash the company kept on hand for emergencies. Of Victoria, of Isadora, or whatever other name she had used before, or would use again, there was nothing left but a car that, according to the gate guard, had pulled off the property barely 10 minutes earlier, driven by someone he couldn't describe with any real clarity. Police opened an investigation that very night, but as the weeks passed, and then the months, the case went cold. No accounts under her name turned up, no trace at any airport, no lead that pointed anywhere solid. It was, as one investigator put it, like chasing someone who'd spent her whole life practicing how to disappear. That night, Claire felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not full relief, but a small, persistent unease. The uncomfortable certainty that somewhere out there that woman was probably already building, with the same patience as always, a brand new story for another man, in another town. That night, after the last guests had finally gone, Daniel found Claire alone in the backyard. "Claire." "Sir, please don't call me that, not after this. I don't know what else to call you, sir." Daniel stepped closer. "You've worked in this house for 6 years. 6 years where I barely looked at you like a person. And just a few weeks ago, I humiliated you, told you to know your place, when all you were trying to do was protect me from something I didn't want to see myself. I only did what felt right, sir. I know, and that's exactly what makes this worse. I could have fired you. I could have believed what she told me without checking anything. And instead you, someone who had every reason in the world to let me fall, chose to risk everything to warn me. I couldn't stay quiet, sir, not with what I knew. Even if it cost you your job. Even if it cost me my job." Daniel stood quietly, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That question I asked you once out here in this same yard, the one I never finished. I was going to ask if you thought it was possible to recognize, in the middle of all the noise, the one person who actually matters. I didn't know how to answer that question for myself back then, but I think tonight I finally understand it." "Sir, Daniel," he corrected gently. "Please." "Daniel," she repeated, her voice barely audible. "I don't think it's right that you—" "I know exactly what I'm doing," he interrupted. "And I know I don't deserve, after how I treated you, even the right to say this, but I need to say it anyway. For months, while I was busy trying to build a life with someone who turned out not to exist, there was, this whole time, a real person standing right in front of me, and I never once stopped to actually see her. I was scared," Claire said finally, "of feeling something I knew I shouldn't feel. Do you still feel it?" "Yes." Daniel took the last step between them and slowly, almost hesitantly, reached for her hand. "I'm not going to ask you to trust me right away," he said. "I know I haven't earned that yet, but I want the chance to earn it. Slowly, however long it takes." "Okay," she said, quietly. "Slowly." The months that followed weren't easy. The scandal from the party became, for weeks, the favorite topic of conversation in Crescent Bay, and Daniel had to face, on top of the pain of having been deceived, the public embarrassment of admitting to his business partners what had happened. But little by little things settled. Daniel's lawyers managed to cancel any transfer tied to the joint account in time, and the name Isadora Mendez circulated in business circles across several countries as a warning. No one could say for certain whether that was enough to stop her. For months, nothing more was heard from her. Claire still thought about her, every now and then, not with pity this time, with an uneasy certainty that somewhere the same story was probably already repeating itself, under a different name for a different man. And in a way, she was right. Almost 8 months after that night, Marcus called Daniel with news that took him several minutes to fully explain. An alert shared between business circles across multiple countries after what had happened in Crescent Bay had reached a small coastal town in Italy where a woman using a completely different name was about to marry a widowed businessman who owned a chain of hotels. Local police, tipped off just a day before, waited until the very last possible moment, right as the groom finished his vows and the officiant asked if anyone had any objections. Someone did. Isadora Mendez was arrested right at the altar, still in her white dress, never having signed a single document, never having touched $1 of the fortune that, once again, had almost slipped away with her. When Claire heard the news, she didn't feel the full satisfaction she'd expected. What she felt instead was something closer to relief, knowing that this time, someone else wouldn't have to go through what had nearly happened to Daniel. Daniel, for his part, changed in a way that surprised everyone who knew him. He started coming home earlier. He started sitting in the kitchen, some evenings, talking with Loretta and Claire, listening for the first time in years to stories he'd never once taken the time to ask about before. "Did you know your mum's been responding better to the treatment for 3 months now?" he asked her one day, without her having told him. "How do you know that?" "Because I asked," he said simply. "Because it matters to me now." A year after that party, in a small ceremony, none of the extravagant lighting or the hundreds of guests from before, just Loretta, Marcus, and Eleanor as the main witnesses, Daniel Whitfield finally married the woman who, for 6 years, had poured his coffee in that house without him ever truly noticing who she was, until the day she decided to risk everything to tell the truth. The ceremony was held in the same backyard where a year earlier everything had fallen apart. "I want every time you look at this yard," Daniel told her that afternoon, "for the first thing you remember not to be the night everything broke, but the night everything finally fell into place." When it came time for the vows, Daniel, never a man of many words in front of others, spoke longer than anyone expected him to. "I spent years building things, convinced that was enough." And the whole time, the person who actually understood what it meant to build something solid, who proved it every single day, through her silence, her patience, her honesty, even when it cost her almost everything, was standing right in front of me. "It took me 6 years to see her. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for that lost time." "I just waited," Claire answered, her eyes full of tears. "And in the end, the waiting was worth it." "Are you happy?" Loretta asked her later that afternoon, helping her adjust her dress. "More than I ever thought was possible," Claire answered, with a smile that, for the first time in a long time, hid absolutely nothing. Because in the end, what had started as a carefully built lie told by a woman who'd learned to survive by destroying others ended up revealing something far simpler and far truer, that real love almost never arrives with announcements or string lights woven through the trees. It arrives slowly, quietly, in the way someone chooses to stay, chooses to care, chooses to tell the truth, even when staying silent would be so much easier. And sometimes all it takes is looking away from what seems perfect, and finally looking toward what was there the whole time. If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments. From 0 to 10, what would you rate it?